Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Greetings and welcome to the second in the series of lectures on human flourishing put on by the St Andrew's Trust for the Study of Religion and Society. Today's presentation is going to be from three people, and we're going to be looking at something about futures, about what we need to do in New Zealand in order to encourage human flourishing. So our three speakers, there's information about them in the handout. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Morgan Godfery. I'd just like to say Morgan's a wonderful communicator and a wonderful writer, and yeah, I'm sure you'll be very interested to hear what he's got to say. And thank you.
Ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Hello everyone, and thanks Jan for that introduction. I've been travelling the country recently telling anyone who will listen that the bizarre thing about New Zealand politics is that while storms batter the rest of the world, think of Trump, think of Brexit, think of Le Pen, even look at Pauline Hanson and Malcolm Turnbull across the ditch, in comparison New Zealand is an island of calm. No one's promising to build a wall, no one is promising to withdraw from human rights agreements, and no one's actually promising to upset the current order all that much. We're relaxed, to borrow the John Key phraseology. In fact, if you were to imagine the ideal antagonist to someone like Donald Trump, you'd want someone pretty solid, someone knowledgeable, someone who thinks with their brain rather than their mouth. And I think you'd imagine someone like Bill English or Andrew Little, as depressing as that is. Because if you looked at it, no one would, Bill English and Andrew Little aren't going to inspire anyone to do something horrible. But I've been thinking recently about this comparison I've been using, and I think it's quite a bad one because it actually obscures the very real problems that we have in this country. It obscures things like the fact that, let me get the figures to you, 139,000 people are out of work, 34,000 more than when National took office in 2008. It obscures the fact that the average rent in Auckland is about $23,000, $8,000 more than when National came in 2008. And it obscures the fact that since National took office, the gap between in median weekly earnings between Māori and Pākehā has grown 47%. That's a huge amount. At this point it might sound like this is just about nasty National and all we need is a change of government. Sure, that could help, but what I think, or at least my thesis about persistently high unemployment, housing shortages and the widening gap between the haves and have-nots is that this is actually a feature of the system. This isn't a bug, it's not something one individual policy change will fix. It's not even something a simple election will fix. Because if you were, I guess to look at it this way, when Key and Bill English came into power, they did three really important things. They borrowed to fund government services, they invested large amounts in infrastructure projects like the communist-sounding roads of national significance, and they increased benefit levels for the first time in 20 or 30 years. These are actually choices that a social democratic Labour Party probably would have made as well. Yet things are still a little bit shit. And why? Because the system isn't functioning as it should. And the system isn't functioning as it should because of one or two policy choices a certain government made. It's actually a feature, or at least that's my idea. I guess if you were to compare it, or compare today's system to the social democratic age, the post-war era, the so-called golden age of capitalism, the share of economic growth going to wage and salary earners, people largely like you and I at the time, was 50%. Today the share going to wage and salary earners is 37%. The rest of it actually goes to the owners of capital. So again, we're talking about this feature of the system. We're not talking about a bug. I guess before going on, it's kind of easy to treat these numbers as an abstraction, and it's sort of hard because you're sort of bamboozled by tens of thousands and tens of millions and billions. But I guess look at it this way, that what this means in practice, what this 37% figure means in practice is that at the same time Auckland mansions and Auckland garages are breaking price records. who actually see more and more people living in cars than ever before. At the same time, we're putting more and more New Zealanders through work. There are actually 100,000 New Zealanders who aren't in work, education, or training. I guess these are contradictions very much in the Marxist sense, to get all ideological with you. I guess the point I come at it from is this growth in the underclass, and I'm sorry to use that word, it's a horrible one, but the easiest shorthand to hand, has happened under both Labour and National. It's just a fact. And if you accept what some of the theorists say about neoliberalism or the current system, this surplus labour force could actually be a good thing. In other words, we're talking about a feature of the system and not a bug. I guess the problem, though, for neoliberalism or the system or whatever you want to call it, is that its own features are starting to catch up with it. Maybe not in New Zealand, or at least not in obvious ways. We don't have a Donald Trump, we don't have hundreds of thousands of people marching on the streets. But the rise of populist politicians, of those populist politicians, is perhaps a worrying sign of where things are heading. Probably a good example is to look at Theresa May, the Tory Prime Minister in the UK, who said, sounding distinctly social democratic, that, quote, "No individual tycoon and no single business, however rich, has succeeded on their own," she said. "It doesn't matter to me who you are. If you're a tax dodger, we're coming after you." She continued, "If you're an accountant, a financial advisor, a middleman, someone who helps people avoid what they owe to society, we're coming after you too," she said. Theresa May reckons she's on the side of, quote, "ordinary working class people," end quote. And the reason I share that with you, I think, is because it's a really good signal of consent for the system is starting to break down from both ends, not just the left, because we've always been talking about neoliberalism or how the system's a little bit shit, but also from the right, with people like Theresa May contesting it at least at a rhetorical level, if not a policy level, because her solution is, rather than tax business, we should target migrant workers, and we should target the small and medium-sized businesses that employ them. That's not a progressive policy solution, that's not a social democratic or socialist solution. But I think it is quite interesting nonetheless. And at the same time, you see Jeremy Corbyn almost running exactly the same lines as what Theresa May is, which is perhaps a signal of how far things have moved to the left or how bleak things are for the left. So I guess the idea that I'm using, or the idea that I'm borrowing to describe this sort of weird time that we find ourselves in, is the interregnum. That uncertain time between the death of an old order and the birth of a new one. And this in-between time, I suppose, a variety of morbid symptoms appear, said Antonio Gramsci, who was the Italian Marxist who coined the term. Now, I've just gone over many of the morbid symptoms, and some of them are, pretty bloody scary. But I think that's not the only way to look at an interregnum. In fact, I think it's possibly a very bad way to look at the interregnum. Far better is to understand the time that we're in as an opportunity to shape what comes next, as an opportunity to shape how people understand what is possible in politics. So I guess this brings us to the heart of the matter, and what does it actually take to build a flourishing New Zealand? The first thing to say, because I always feel a little bit awkward giving my own sort of personal prognosis, is that we should all approach the question actually with humility. No one person has the answer, no single group, no single organisation, no single institution has the answer. Instead, building a flourishing New Zealand is a collective effort. It's, I guess, about listening to each other, treating ideological differences in good faith, and putting democratic pluralism above what we as individuals might actually want. I know that sounds kind of mushy, but I think it's actually the best way to work through political disagreement. So yeah, for me, the three things are constitutional change, economic change, and cultural transformation. The first is pretty simple. We need to understand power in this country as it was first agreed to. So in terms of tino rangatiratanga and in terms of kāwanatanga. So in other words, it's about, as Moana Jackson says, not settling the Treaty of Waitangi, but actually honouring what it says. So the Māori text promises two very important things. The The first is tino rangatiratanga, and the second is kawanatanga. The first is full chieftainship for hapu, and the second is the power of government for the crown. The problem in this country is that we've got the relationship in reverse. So the government treats its kawanatanga power as a tino rangatiratanga power, and tino rangatiratanga is treated as derivative from whatever it is the crown is exercising. That's totally wrong, and it doesn't keep faith with what was actually agreed to in the Treaty of Waitangi. So the actual form that this could take, I won't go into it now, but hopefully we can go into it in questions, is up for debate, really. It could be in a codified constitution, or it could be in not a codified constitution at all, but simply reshaping our institutions. So one of Moana Jackson's ideas is to have two spheres of power, as he calls it. So one sphere for Māori and one sphere for the Crown, or for everyone else, essentially. The second transformation is economic. And one of the things that really annoys me, and sorry I'm going to rant at you here, about political discourse is GDP. I hate it. GDP growth is trumpeted as the means and the end of government. But GDP growth actually tells us nothing about how many extra hours Kiwis work to achieve it. It tells us nothing about how much extra effluent we dumped into rivers to lift exports or to get more growth. So I think we need a fundamental shift in how we actually measure and understand and value and control the economy. I guess on this point, or a particular policy point, is tax. We shouldn't be afraid to talk about tax. In New Zealand, returns on housing are more lightly taxed than returns on assets. So that means that our savings go overwhelmingly into an already overheated housing market. In fact, about 90% of the country's, or of households' wealth is held up in their houses, compared to about 50 to 75% for nearly every other OECD country. So we mustn't be afraid of talking about tax and how we can use tax for the public good. Here I was probably going to rant about the Greens budget responsibility, Labour Green budget responsibility rules, but I'll leave that for questions too. And the last point is cultural transformation. I guess Gramsci's great insight was that, or his departure from orthodox Marxism was that the system doesn't just coerce us. Most people actually consent to it. People aren't stupid, they're not duped. People actually consent. Whereas, of course, orthodox Marxism said you were simply coerced to do this and that. Taking this idea that people consent to the system, I think we have to start treating cultural transformation as something really central, rather than just talking about the economy or houses or whatever else it is. So the one particular policy I would really like to see is universal access to Te Reo Māori. Now that means access in schools, but it also means that we should hear Te Reo Māori in places like this. We should hear it over the radio, on television, in Parliament, in workplaces, and in the mouths of Pākehā, Pacific, Asian peoples. It's not, Te Reo Māori isn't just something for Māori, it's something for the entire country. And I think if we acknowledge that, or if we were speaking Te Reo Māori in everyday life, it would teach us new ways of actually looking at the country, and perhaps the idea of honouring the treaty in the way I just described wouldn't actually seem so radical, or perhaps the idea of measuring the economy in terms of, say, manaakitanga, which is caring for others, a standard of caring for others, meeting human needs, maybe that wouldn't seem so radical as well. So I hope you agree, and hopefully we can get into this in questions. Kia ora rā.
Thank you very much, Morgan. And if any of you haven't heard about the book which Morgan edited, The Interregnum, I heartily commend it to you as a very prescient piece of work. So now I'd like to invite Laura O'Connell Rapira to come up and talk. And Laura is the campaigns officer, campaigns person for Action Station.
Thank you. Kia ora tātou. Thank you very much for having me, firstly, and thank you for your very rousing and brilliant presentation, Morgan. Cool, so I apologise if you have seen me present before, because I pretty much always start with these fish. But yes, kia ora, my name is Laura. I am I descend from Te Atiawa in Ngāpuhi. I come from Taranaki originally, via Waitakere City, and now live in Brooklyn and Wellington. I always start with this slide because I think that the kind of state of play in the world can be summed up in this image right here, and that big fish is essentially the world's problems, and that could be climate change or economic inequality or kind of the erosion of Indigenous rights. And it can often feel like that big fish is winning because we're kind of all scattered off in different directions. And I think that happens for a lot of different reasons, but two that I really think it boils down to is a lack of connection and a lack of collaboration. And what I mean by that is that the average New Zealander will see anything between 200 and 2,000 advertisements per day, and a lot of that is for stuff that delivers very little real environmental or social impact in our world. And so that makes it very, very difficult for people to be able to connect with things that do, of course, matter. And then there's kind of a lack of collaboration. So for the last 5, maybe 7 years actually, I've been working in the kind of charity NGO space. And charities and NGOs do an excellent job, but we are competitive and we are competing with one another for people's attention, people's donations. And to give you a kind of really stark example of that, I was at an Oxfam talk last week, and in it they were talking about how in Vanuatu there are 26 different organisations who are working on clean water projects. None of them are working together, and none of them are working with the government. And so all of those organisations have something like 290 wells, and there's no coordinated central strategy as to how they can do this. And part of the problem is the way that non-governmental organisations are positioned to begin with. We are called non-governmental organisations rather than for-purpose organisations or whatever that might be, or for collaboration organisations perhaps. It's difficult for us to connect to the things that matter, and there is not a lot of collaboration in the space for people who are working on the things that matter, and that's difficult. The other major problem that we see is that there is a problem with the way that we are telling our stories. And so I'll give you an example using the US election. So Trump and Bernie Sanders told a version of a story that explained why people's life is getting harder in America. And Trump's version of the story is, you've been promised the American dream all of your life, and you are not able to reach it, and the reason you're not able to reach it is because the Muslims are stealing our way of life, the Mexicans are coming over the border, and the Chinese are taking all of our jobs. Bernie Sanders told that same story. He said, you want the American dream, you've been sold it all your life, and the reason you can't get it is because a handful of billionaires have far too much power, and that power is concentrated, and that makes it impossible for everyday working Americans to kind of lift themselves out and get those same opportunities. The way that they explain those problems point people to specific policy interventions or to vote for a certain person, and it's because of the way that they explain those stories. And I think one of the big problems, to kind of bring it into New Zealand as an example, and this is something we've been thinking about a lot recently, is the way that we describe poverty in New Zealand as an example. So in New Zealand we talk about child poverty, and I agree that talking about child poverty has done a really good job of putting the issue of poverty and economic inequality in New Zealand on the agenda. But the problem is, when we talk about child poverty, the solutions that people support are give the kids breakfast in schools, give the kids 50 cents a day through KidsCan. It's not lift benefit levels and give workers a living wage so that families can feed their own kids, right? So when we talk about child poverty, it points people to support solutions that I would argue exacerbate the problem even further. And so that brings me to what I do now, which is at Action Station. Hands up if you have actually heard of Action Station before. Awesome, that's great. So Action Station, the reason that we launched it is because we recognised that the kind of space was, the progressive movement was becoming more and more fragmented, and we wanted to be able to kind of bring people together for shared collaborations, shared campaigning, shared values. And so we do that in 3 different ways. We have 3 different types of campaigns. One are petitions and campaigns that members of our community start. So that's just an ordinary citizen sees something that they're passionate about, they start an online petition. If it gets enough growth, we support them to turn that into a kind of flourishing campaign. So that's one sort of way that we do things. The other way that we do things is we as staff, we organise campaigns where We work with our community of more than 150,000 people now to take strategic, coordinated action on the things that we care about. And then the third type of campaign we run is in partnership with organisations. And so 90% of our campaigns at the moment are actually run in partnership, and that's either with an academic group, another NGO, a community group who has lived experience of the issue that we're trying to work on. And so basically our work summed up in emojis here, because I am a millennial, is that we work with lots of awesome people using the power of the internet, digital tools, modern technologies to combine our tools, our money, our ideas, our time, our energy, our creativity, our voice to create a fairer, more flourishing and beautiful world. So that's kind of Action Station in an emoji slide. And I'm going to unpack a little bit what our DNA is and kind of the way that we do our work so that people can get a better understanding of what it is that we do. So the first thing is that we are progressive, so we aren't values neutral. There is organisations out there like change.org, for instance, where you can start petitions online and anyone can start a petition there. We aren't like that. We are very much focused on 5 different categories, and they are economic fairness, transparent democracy, a thriving, healthy environment, human rights and global peace, and Indigenous rights underpinning all of those. Action Station is also, first and foremost, a member-driven, people-powered organisation. So in the past, I've been working for Greenpeace and WWF and Oxfam, and I really love the work that they do, but the model of change that they use is give us $30 a month while we go off and save the world. And that is not what we do at Action Station. What we do at Action Station is we email a segment of our list every Friday. We say things, we ask people to rank the issues that they care about. We ask them how they can give, how they can get involved. And we try and give them different opportunities to contribute in different ways. So that might be making a submission to a select committee, that might be sending an email to a decision maker, that might be turning up to a rally, it might be hosting a dinner with your friends. We try and give people as many different ways to get involved as possible. And the essential service that we are offering to people through that is kind of turning people's outrage and hope for a better world, outrage at the current world we have and hope for something better, into a way that they can take strategic action to hopefully influence outcomes. We are also multi-issue, so unlike a lot of other organisations who are single-issued, who are really good at being single-issue, and I don't mean to say we don't need single-issue organisations, because we absolutely need kind of experts that stay in the trenches and work for like 10 years on something to progress something. But we are multi-issue because humans are essentially multi-issue, and we respond to things like opportunities and crises. And so we strongly believe that by being multi-issue, we can offer something different to the kind of community that are out there. So if you are an organisation that has been working on climate change for the last 5 years and you've only been able to reach the people who are engaged in the issue of climate change, we can introduce people who came to us through workers' rights issues, for example, and say, hey, you care about justice, maybe you also care about this. We at Action Station jokingly call this the Netflix recommendation model. So when we're introducing people to something different, it's like, hey, you care about justice, you probably care about this too. We use digital tools. We use digital tools, but I think it's really important to point out that we are not an online organisation. Tech is just a tool, and we use it, I mean, in our ideal world, it should be totally invisible to what it is that we're doing. It's just a means to an end, and it's the tool that we use because lots of people are using it as well. We are grassroots, which means, of course, that we are of, by, and for the people, and we also operate on what is called an outsider power theory of change. And that's basically, we don't try and build really strong relationships with a particular MP and kind of compromise and try and keep them happy so they'll keep the door open to us so we can lobby them. We focus on building political power and bringing the people on board so that no matter which MP is in power, we can say, you need to listen because all of these voters that put you there want this thing. So that's very much our focus. We are collaborative, as I've already mentioned. 90% of our campaigns are a collaboration. And we also apply what's called a low floor and high ceiling approach to our work. So there is a lot of skepticism, I think, about online petitions, but for us, it's really just the gateway drug. It's the way that we find 10,000 people who care about an issue so that we can follow them up and be like, yo, we all want no one in poverty, like no New Zealander to live in poverty, what do we do next? And online petitions are the way that we bring people in there. But our job as Action Station staff is to say, okay, we've signed this petition, what do we do next? And that's always what we're looking for, is an opportunity to take people beyond that first signing of the petition. We are full spectrum, which is what I already spoke about, which is asking people for more than just money. It's asking for their time and their ideas and their energy. We are fiercely independent as well, and this is actually something that I think we do offer, where we do offer value to the movement. I won't mention the organisation, but we have in the past been given so you know when organisations and NGOs make a submission to Select Committee, we were given the copy of a submission from an organisation who was working on quite a difficult issue that they would have given to government had they not had government funding, if that makes sense. So in the NGO space, there are a lot of organisations who are government funded, and that makes it very difficult for them to speak out. It's like, you're allowed to speak out a little, but not too much. Don't rock the boat too much because you'll lose your funding. So they sent us the copy of the submission that they would have sent, and we shared that with our members and asked our members to make submissions on that Select Committee. And the reason that we're able to do that is because we don't take funding from government or major corporations or lottery grants, because that's part of the problem. We are also nimble, and I think this is one of the strongest points of Action Station. We chase the energy, and our work is all about kind of giving people an opportunity to take action where high information, basically when there's media saturation. When everyone is talking about a thing, we launch something then and there because that is the time to capitalise on it, because with the 24/7 news and media cycle these days, it's very difficult to keep people engaged and keeping on beyond that kind of initial outrage that people have at the headline. So we very much believe in major change moments and capitalising on those opportunities to make change. The reason I'm talking so much about the kind of theory of change and the way that Action Station operates in something about human flourishing is just to give you a sense of how much thought we have put into how we create a world where that is fair and flourishing. And I also want to let you know that we do put a lot of thought into the gaps that exist in our model and the work that we do. So because we are very much driven by media moments, that also means that we risk having quick wins. That's, you know, saving the tree in Titirangi, saving the Kodi tree in Titirangi, but losing the overall war, which is there's still massive amounts of deforestation happening, and our rivers are becoming more and more polluted every single day. And so that's where partnering with single issue organisations who do stay in the trenches for years at a time is really important to us. And once we've activated those people at those key moments, as much as possible, we try and push them in the direction of the people who will continue doing that kind of long-term work. Fostering a culture of collectivism. So this is often a criticism of online activism. And the reason I share this idea of the low floor, high ceiling is that I think it's really important for the narrative to shift away from online petitions are not as worthy somehow as offline activism, because a lot of the people in our community are people who are older, or they're people who have different disabilities, and actually online activism is the best way that they can get involved. And the other thing is that why not use the tools that are available to us to reach people at a scale never imagined before? Why not? I absolutely am a big fan of collectivism. A reliance on outrage and media cycles can feed a sense of hopelessness and overwhelm, and I'm absolutely acutely aware of that. And one of the things that we're trying to do more and more at Action Station is tell more of the stories of hope and change, and how when we come together at those key moments, it can actually push that more fair, flourishing world 1 inch at a time towards that. It's also hard, obviously, to become financially sustainable when you are independent and don't take money from all of those different organisations. So if you don't already give money to Action Station, please do. And so one other part about Action Station is that I don't think a lot of people realise, because we don't tell this story very much, is that we do belong to an international network of organisations who use the same model as us. And this network was established in 2013. This is a little bit out of date because we now have 21 groups all around the world, in India, in South Africa, in Sweden, in Canada, Australia, Germany, Ireland, the list goes on and on and on. And essentially, combined, we represent worldwide 1 in every 15 voters, which is an enormous amount of power. But what is different is that, unlike, say, Greenpeace, where you have 30 different Greenpeaces all around the world who are working towards a shared agenda, our agenda is driven by our members in our country. And so rather than working together on a shared agenda, we share things like resources and technology and tools. So as a tangible example for you, when we're running our 0 Hours campaign, which was about 2.5 years ago, I think it was, our brothers and sisters in the UK had already run a 0 Hours campaign to great success, and we basically just lifted what they did and copy and pasted it and dropped it into New Zealand. And so that kind of sharing of knowledge and resources is a really great way to build that kind of more fair and flourishing future we all want. And I'll just really quickly go over some of the examples of how this model of change can create the world that we are hoping for. So in 2006, and I have to read this, I apologise because I don't quite know it off by heart yet, but it is, I was particularly struck by it. In 2006, in an effort to hold onto power, the Howard government in Australia changed the electoral laws so that once an election was announced, people only had a couple of days to get enrolled to vote, otherwise they wouldn't be able to get on the roll. And this was a deliberate way to try and stay in power because they were doing a lot of things that were disenfranchising Indigenous Australians and also young people. And those are the groups that tend to not be able to enroll at a post office or via fax at that time at the drop of a hat. And so GetUp launched a petition, they sent submissions, they asked their members to make calls, met with MPs, and it didn't have any success. So in 2010, they decided to survey their 70,000 members at the time to ask whether or not they should take the case to the High Court. They explained the enormous financial risk that this would entail, taking the government to the High Court, and said that if they lost, it would have to be paid by those members, and that would be to the tune of $500,000. And so they were totally honest with these 70,000 people about that, and 97% of those people said, yes, go for it, let's do it. And that really illustrates to me that I think often we are kind of thinking that we need to ask people to do the small stuff and then get them to do the bigger stuff. And that's certainly been some of the thinking at Action Station. But I think actually sometimes people are just waiting to be asked to do big stuff. And we have a real yearning for that kind of transformational, revolutionary type of change. And sometimes it's our ask that's getting in the way of making that happen. So further than that, needless to say, GetUp took the case to the High Court and won, and because of that, an extra 100,000 people can now enrol today, which is really, really brilliant, and most of those people are Indigenous Australians and young people. What also happened, though, is GetUp built an online tool that enabled people to do enrolments online, because in 2006 or 2007, the government didn't actually have that. So they built this tool, and it got such enormous pickup that they more or less the government had to change the law to enable online enrolments because of that. And that tool, to this day, has seen more than 500,000 Australians enrol because of it. And so that was a really, really brilliant campaign, and it started with an online petition. So I thought that was a good example. I don't know how much time I have left, so I might just skip through these ones. Sorry, I should have put my timer on. I'll highlight this one because I think it's really important and poignant. This is zooming over to Ireland. When the tragic image of Curley went viral, that's the little toddler who was on the beach in Turkey, the world went into shock, and the Irish government at that time, much like the government in New Zealand, refused to increase the annual refugee quota despite repeated calls from the people to do so. So our sister organisation in Ireland, they're called Uplift, they set up a tool to enable people to pledge a bed to a refugee. And 14,000 people pledged a bed within 3 days, which basically showed that the Irish people were much more compassionate than their government at that time. Those 14,000 people then went on to crowdfund a full-page ad in the national newspaper, which helped change the tone of the national debate. Because what they did with that newspaper ad is they focused on Irish people seeking refuge in their own history and really tapped into a story of of exactly what people in Ireland have been through. They held vigils on the Irish coastlines to remember people who had passed away in the famine, and as a result of that flurry of activity, and this was about a 2-month-long campaign, the government agreed to increase the annual refugee quota from 600 to 4,000 per year, and that came into practice, that came into legislation at the beginning of this year. And so that was another example of how being nimble and being ready to act at the drop of a button when high media scrutiny is there can change the direction of something that would have otherwise gone in a not very nice direction. And so bringing that into New Zealand, I'll just really quickly touch on just one of the examples of how Action Station has successfully made a difference in New Zealand. So when the Ashburton District Council were wanting to sell off the rights to sell 40,000 litres of water to a bottled water company, we launched a petition, and remarkably 40,000 people signed that petition within the space of a couple of days, and that's more than the population of Ashburton, so it was something that really got people's attention. And then what we did is we crowdfunded this lovely, if you can't see it, it's a truck with a billboard on it that says, Ashburton District Councillors, 40,000 Kiwis say no to your sellout of our water, remember that come election time. And we drove that truck around Ashburton for like half a day on the day that they were having their council meeting to decide this. So naturally everyone in Ashburton saw that, because Ashburton's not super big. And we invited all of the media to come down. Every single media outlet came to that, which I really commend them for coming along and helping apply that pressure. And because of that, the Ashburton District Council cancelled that sale and kept it in the Commons, which was really, really great. And again, that campaign was only about a month long. But all of that is just small incremental changes towards the kind of more fair and flourishing world that we all hope is possible, or we all know is possible in our hearts. And what Action Station are looking to do this election year is bring people together to have one of the largest conversations about where we want our country to be in 2040, which will be 200 years from when the Treaty of Waitangi was signed. Our goal is to have 170,000 people take part in this conversation, which is equal to 5% of the voting population, or enough to have a seat in Parliament. And so we're really trying to get political teeth there. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to empower members of our community to have conversations with one another online using new technologies. We're going to be hosting town meetings much like this all around the country. And we're also going to be encouraging people to have dinners, food for thought, talk to one another over kai, because one of the big problems is that we don't, in the age of social media and kind of the rise of echo chambers, we are just talking to ourselves, and we need to get beyond that and talk to one another so that we don't have a situation where we go, I don't know anyone who voted for Trump. And so we're going to bring people together over kai to talk about where we want to be in 2040. We'll then present this vision that we co-create through those different ways to the political parties in August and say, how does your vision stack up against the people's vision? And then in September, we'll be encouraging people to get out and vote for the political party that is most in line with our 2040 vision. And our goal is to use the election year as an excuse to talk about where we're going in the kind of more long term. And I hope to have you all involved in that if you wish to be. Action Station is still pretty new. We're 3 years old. Our ambition is much bigger than our capacity. But my dream is, like, what does it look like if we have 250,000 New Zealanders working together in strategic, coordinated, powerful ways to take action for the fairer, more flourishing Aotearoa? What would you do if you had 250,000 people behind you? And hopefully we can create a world that's a bit more like this. So thank you.
Thank you, Laura. And it was great to see so many hands go up of people who already know about Action Station. And I really like that idea of the high ceiling, and I know how empowering it feels to me when I'm able to make a change. So thank you. And our next speaker is Christina Curley. Christina is I understand her to be a social entrepreneur. And what that means is she's got some amazing ideas that are looking for some money, but they're really good ideas, and they're definitely about human flourishing, but also her relationship with the Flourishing Foundation, which is an organisation that puts young people through a programme to help them to support young people in New Zealand.
Well, kia ora tātou, ko Christina tuku ingoa. As Jan said, I am here as a graduate of the 2015 Life Hack Flourishing Fellowship, which is a group of 22 people around Aotearoa, New Zealand, looking to help young people flourish in New Zealand. I also have two social enterprises. One is Upwards and one is Savvy Up, and you can find a little bit about Savvy Up at the back. The old story of separation is dying. Go to uni, get a job for life, buy a house. The script no longer works. But we don't know yet what's going to take its place. So how do we help our young people to flourish in a world where everything is uncertain? What role does systemic change play in this? And even more, how do we work towards a world of connection and kindness? So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. First of all, I'm going to talk about cultural myths and the story of separation and the story of connection and the bit in between, which Morgan calls the interregnum. Then I'll be talking about systemic change and complex systems and how we can do this at a macro level. And then finally, I'll be talking about what we can do at a micro level, so what you and I can do. So first of all, Charles Eisenstein, in his book, The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible, he talks about the story of separation and the story of connection. So it's a cultural myth, a way of being that everybody knows. You go to uni, you get a job for life, you buy a house, you have 2.4 kids. Everybody knows. But actually this story is dying. The story is nearly dead. And so it's a tremendous source of fear for our young people, because right now we have a gap. We don't have a story to take its place. Now we know that we can move towards the connection in a more joined up world. But right now, the new story is yet to be fully born. We're at a tipping point, right? It could go either way. So our job as adults is to help our young people to move towards this the right way that we want. We want it to go to the love and connection point. We don't want to go back to separation because it's going to be worse. So we have to act now, right? So my program Upwards, it's founded on Joseph Campbell's myth of the hero's journey, which is the idea that the hero in every culture, there's a myth. And it's called the monomyth, and it's around the story that the hero gets called to action, and sometimes he says, no, I'm not going to do that, but eventually he has to act, and he goes through a series of trials, and then eventually he gets to the ordeal, and sometimes this is a literal or a figurative death, but he has to get through the ordeal, and then he comes out the other side and he's reborn, and he takes that new knowledge back to civilization, that torch, and he goes back and he integrates that back into everyday life. So my program Upwards, which is leadership skills, and especially foundational leadership skills for high school students, that is about teaching, helping those young people to make that transition from where they are now, and maybe they're ashamed of who they are, maybe they're ashamed of where they come from, maybe they're not having such a good time, maybe they need a bit of help. So my program is about helping give those young people a leadership boost through the ordeal and into where they know that they can be. So that ordeal in the story of humanity, that's a rite of passage. That's a rite of passage into adulthood where we're being called to do new things. We're being called to do stuff that's going to help our young people to move into that new world, right? And we really are going through that right now. So we have to find new ways to teach our young people creativity, to teach resilience, to equip our young people for the challenges that they're going to have to solve. They're going to have to solve climate change. We're going to have a lot more refugees coming to New Zealand as climate change impacts a lot of the outlying islands. We've already got really high inequality, and that's only going to get worse unless we do something different. So, how do we do that? There's two ways. First of all, there's a macro level. So, everything is made up of complex systems. And so it's a little bit like a watch. Like the inside of my watch right here, it's a mechanical watch. So when you change one thing, and you can see here, this is the picture of a town clock. When you change one thing, it changes everything. Every single cog is connected. So you can't just change one thing at a systems level. You have to change multiple things at once. And so Morgan's talked about that, and Laura's talked about that, about how we can change things. And I've worked in government, so I know a bit about changing the levers. So sometimes you have to change more than one lever at the same time. You've got to press several at once, you've got to push this little bit here. But the point is, to make change, long-lasting systemic change, we have to change systems. And we make the systems. We are the government, okay? We make the systems. So we have to change the systems and the systemic change so that we can either put pressure on the government to do it, or we can do it ourselves at a grassroots level. But either way, for our young people to flourish, we need to change the systems. So some examples of systemic actions that we could take would be resourcing low-income parents. There are a lot of resources I know that Morgan's already talked about and Laura's talked about. If we can resource low-income parents, there are tons of research saying their parenting skills will go up, their material needs will go down, they won't need programs in schools to feed their kids, because that is about shifting the needle, and that is something that government can do. Income redistribution. Things like reducing inequality. So that, again, that's a government series of levers. That's not one thing that you can just flick. That are multiple, in a complex system. All of these cogs are moving, remember, so we've got to do lots of little things that are going to change it. And also, so the other thing about that is Max Rashbrook, who wrote a book about inequality in New Zealand, he talked about the fact that in a survey, 75% of the people in that survey thought that people were in poverty because it was their fault. We need to change that language. There are so many systemic barriers that we need to change that keep people in poverty, and that's what Upwards is designed to address, some of that work. We need to, and likewise, we need to fix the problem in New Zealand of systemic racism. Really, really massive. That's what's keeping some of our young people from flourishing. The way that we teach in Upwards is very much kinesthetic. It's about running around playing games and doing things, hands-on doing things, and a little bit of korero, a bit of talk. Most of that is about the action and the doing and the movement. So the way that we teach in schools isn't designed well for the way that young people learn. And another part of that would be, what happens if we were truly bicultural? To pick up Morgan's point, what would it be like if we were like, say, Wales, where every street sign is bilingual, where language, everything would be in te reo Māori and in English? What would that look like? How do we actually truly honour our young people and their birthright in this country, either as Māori or Pākehā? How do we do that? So that would be, it's about pride and where they come from. So encouraging that, and that's, again, one of the things that we cover in Upwards. How we help people understand their whakapapa and where they come from is really important, and giving them pride in who they are. Another thing we can do is we can take away the responsibility of schools as first responders. So schools aren't really about teaching at the moment. They have to deal with some fairly major stuff every day. If we could completely take away that responsibility from them, have a holistic approach where we have lots of different government organisations working together, whānau ora, things like that, where we can bring people, take that responsibility off the schools, give that to another area, whether it's government, whether it's private enterprise, and we create a market for it. That would actually be really helpful for Upwards while I work out the funding problem. We just need to take it away from schools because they're forced to deal with everything and they just don't have the resources and they can't do it. So we really, really would help our young people if we were able to do that. Because the schools need to be focusing on the fact that we need to be teaching creativity and resilience to our young people. That's the most important thing we need to teach right now. It's not even education, it's about how to learn, how to change, how to grow, how to be resilient. Those are far more important right now for this world that as we navigate this period where we don't know the story, we don't know what's going to happen, but we have to construct a new story. And finally, what we need to do is actually fund the essential life skills for young people. So because we can't necessarily rely on parents to do that. Maybe they don't know, maybe they never learned, but we have to divorce that out of school and put that into a separate set of activities. I think that would be much fairer on schools, rather than forcing schools to do what's called the hidden curriculum, where they're trying to teach values, but it's not measured, it's not able to really be resourced. So that's actually what Upwards does. It's about teaching character, it's about teaching those foundational leadership and life skills, and those social skills, and those areas where people, everyone says there's a problem and everyone says that there is a need for it, but let's actually do it. And finally, to resource those areas, let's create new business models. So I've been struggling with Upwards for 2.5 years on finding the right business model that's going to be a social enterprise that connects the community, it connects amazing facilitators of young people back into their communities and resources them properly. Right now, our youth workers, they have a job there's not enough money in it, and they need to be resourced more. They are absolutely living on minimum wage, and it's not fair. So if we're going to really help our young people flourish, we need to be resourcing the teachers and the youth workers and all of the other people who work with young people. And finally, if we were able to help shift the healthcare aspect so that we were able to offer free healthcare to everybody up to 18, I think that would really help with flourishing. So, the micro level. So we all have to act. The really important part, as Laura's pointed out, Morgan's pointed out, this is up to us, all right? So we all need to act to shift this tipping point. So one of the things that we can do in our own communities is that we can hire a young person for their first job. Got some great research from Terry Fleming, which is basically about how the number of part-time jobs in neighbourhoods are going down, and this is really severely impacting young people getting essential skills and life skills for their first job, which then helps them when they go to get their next job. So what you can do is you can hire a young person in your neighbourhood, and you can give them that job experience, and you can help them. So the other thing you can do if you're an employer, so you can hire a young person into a job. So by 2020, which is only 3 years away, Generation Y and Generation Z, which are my generation and younger, are going to be 50% of the workforce. So they're going to change, they're already starting to do it, but they will change how the workforce happens. But there's a huge problem where young people aren't being hired at the graduate level, and because the people in the older end are needing to work for longer. So what that's creating is a huge ticking time bomb. So very soon we're going to see a problem where there aren't enough new leaders coming in at the graduate and beyond level that are being upskilled to take up this mantle. So that's actually something that's so important to me that Tanya, my co-founder who's at the back, and I have developed a company around that which is helping grads into the workforce. So you can find out a little bit about this. And the other thing you can do is you can be that supportive adult for a young person. It only takes one adult, one person to support a young person in their life, one mentor. That one person is enough to build resilience for a young person and make a difference. So you can be that one person for someone else, okay? I'm here because a lot of people have helped me, and I know that that's something that everybody here can do. If you're a parent, what you can do is you can empower your young people to take risks in a safe environment. You've got to let go of control, okay? That's really, really important. So you've got to allow them, rather than doing too much for them, allow them to fail, allow them to experience consequences. That's okay. So we actually have a great focus at Savvy Up about teaching habits. So Tim Elmore, who's an American guy, he says if you teach habits, attitudes will follow, and he calls it habitudes. And so we have a really great, in Savvy Up, we've got a great focus on, we believe if you teach the habit, the good attitude will follow. So as a parent, don't worry about the attitude, focus on teaching the habit, and then the attitude will follow. And finally, we can help empower the change makers. So we can act ourselves, and we can also help those in our community, like Laura and others in Action Station and other community groups that are doing good work. Help those people, help them connect, try and avoid the silos, help them do more, okay? And finally, resource and empower communities to make their own solutions. So that's something that I'm trying to do with Upwards. It's very much about providing the resource and letting the youth workers and the young people co-create together. We're still at the beginning of that process, but that is absolutely what we want to do. Because it's actually, in terms of where the story is going to come from, the new story, it comes from the things that are just beginning now. It's going to come from the grassroots. It's going to come from all the small things that we do. And just remember, we're not alone. A lot of my friends who are change makers, they often get really tired and discouraged, and they say, what can I do? Literally, I've done everything, and it feels like I have to save the whales, and I have to save climate change, and I have to deal with this and this and this. And I say, look, you know what? We're not acting alone. We're not acting alone. We can all do a little bit. So that's actually the main point here. We can all act. And acting, even the smallest, most invisible act of kindness or courage, has a huge ripple effect around the world. And that's what's going to push the tipping point over for good.
Thank you very much. That was extremely interesting. And I'm Susan Jones. I'm the Minister here at St Andrews, and I'm going to ask our three speakers to come over here, and we'll get them to talk with each other for a bit, and then we'll ask you to talk with each other for a bit and see what happens now. St Andrews Study Trust has wanted in the present and near future to be asking always at the end of our presentation, so what now? You know, rather than having you listen to a lecture and stuff you full of information and send you out there with perhaps no ideas about what you're going to do with it, we're asking you that question, what now? So have that in your head. We've had some good clues already from the speakers. So, my first question is, as you listen to each other, what did you see as some of the strong resonances coming through? I know what I think, but listening from your point of view to the others, where did you see the reinforcements and the similarities, and which I think give hope for the future, that if you're all working in the same area in different ways, it's going to reinforce. What did you see?
The whakatauki that came to my mind is the he waka eke noa, which is we are all in the canoe together, we're all in the same waka, and I think that was quite a strong theme across what we were all talking about, and how we have this shared desire for a fairer, more flourishing Aotearoa. And I actually think we probably don't get the opportunity to talk about that enough. And I think it was one of the things I noticed that you said is that I know it sounds mushy, which is kind of we always feel the need to precursor the things that we truly feel in our hearts as being, oh yeah, but I know that's mushy. And I actually really appreciate the spaces where it's okay to say that. And other people were like, yeah.
Yeah, I agree that kind of the strong theme was that we have to work together, because we do often make like artificial distinctions between the unions or the churches and the racial justice movement, which I think at the end of the day just isn't very productive. But I think the other kind of thing that I noticed was sort of the urgency of it. Like, we need to act now, we need to act together now.
Thank you. I actually nearly put he waka on the slide as my last, because it's so true. It really is. We're all here together, and we need to all work together, and that was a key thing. And the other thing that was really strong for me was the power of story. We're story creatures. We run on narrativium, as Terry Pratchett put it. So we need to make a new story, and that was really strong. The stories are how we make change.
What I thought were resonances listening to you was the very strong valuing of Māori, te reo, and the bicultural platform on which we operate. I noticed that was a commonality between the three of you. Also, because you are a younger generation than I am, and perhaps some people here, your emphasis on working with your cohort, with your generation, and having an effect there came across really strongly for me. And the other one was you all show a really good background in analysing what's going on and where are the entry points that will have short-term effects and long-term effects, and what's going on here and where's the power, that kind of analysis. I could see how that directs your work and will make it